G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. As the old footy show intro used to go, a week is a long time in football and this week feels longer than most. It's hard to remember that it was only a handful of days ago that we gave up the last 2 goals of the game to Port Adelaide to go down in our final game of 2026 by 10 points. Since then, we've had a media leak followed by the official announcement of Mark McVeigh as the new senior coach of the Essendon Football Club and the press circuit that followed. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me as always is my co-host Ian Hume. Humey, never a dull moment is probably the Essendon tattoo we'll eventually get, but how are you, mate?
I'm doing well here, Jono. It certainly has been a massive week, both for the club and us. You mentioned the press circuit that Mark's been on, and it certainly has been a bit of a gauntlet for him these last few days, but never in my wildest dreams would I thought that I would be part of that gauntlet that he had to go through. And in fact, we were us, or the people we did the interview with, we were right after his press conference. So yeah, I think here we are. I guess, Mark and the club both have done a magnificent job this week presenting themselves and getting the fans behind the decision. But as Mark said himself, the hard work for everyone involved starts now. And I think that includes us, Jono. I think given the way Mark's been talking, we better lift our game as well. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, you're throwing down the gauntlet there, mate. I was looking forward to just, I feel a bit like the Homer Simpson meme at the moment with him creeping back into the hedge, just ready to disappear into the shrubs. But it feels like there's still a lot of 2026 to play out really for our football club, doesn't there? And, the Mark McVeigh and senior coach announcement was obviously the big one. But from here, there's still a lot of other roles to fill. There's obviously trade week and free agency period and then the draft, and then pre-season will start and we go around again. So, yeah, it's going to ramp up really, really quickly. But yeah, I'm good. It was really nice to be out at the hangar on Tuesday, and I was lucky enough to be out there quite early and could sneak away from work. So got there before the crowd and saw a lot of familiar faces, which was really nice. And then also was there for the press conference and got the amusement of watching the players roll their eyes at the 15th question about the Sydney Swans and what happened there. And also about James Hird. I think the players were just keen to, and probably Mark himself, were just keen to get on with things. But yeah, it was a big day and yeah, nice to be there and looking forward to what comes next under as the start of the Mark McVeigh era.
That's it. Well, look, there is still a review to do of our last game. We'll get to that in a minute. Just want to acknowledge a couple of things. Firstly, for keen observers may notice that I am not in the garage tonight. I've managed to graduate to the living room, been allowed back in the house. I'm kind of like a naughty dog that's not allowed inside. Tonight I'm inside, although the heater's not working. So it's not much difference in terms of temperature between the lounge room and the garage. Also want to acknowledge all our tipping competition winners. So we run 2 main tipping competitions, the public one and the Patreon one. So congratulations to Alex Fair, who won the public competition, and Dale Pearce, who won the Patreon only competition. And Dale only just won ahead of Lucamus on margin. It was very tight in that last round. I want to say thanks to everyone who participated and keep an eye out next year for those comps. Also want to shout out Michaela, who won our Year 11 school tipping competition at work. I was in front pretty much the whole way, and then I decided to get creative with my tips, and that blew back in my face, never tipping North Melbourne again. I managed to make that mistake twice in a row. So that's only myself to blame there. But she's won some Don the Stat merch as well, which I'm sure is going to be a great hit on the playground. So well done, Michaela.
Yeah, well done, Alex, Dale and Michaela. And of course, thanks to everyone who's part of that. I disgrace myself once again. I am the world's worst tipster. And yeah, lived up to that title once again.
Yeah. Well, look, as you mentioned earlier, it feels ages ago. It almost feels like a full month since we played that last game against Port Adelaide, given all that's happened. But, for the final time in 2026, let's get into our match review. And look, it wasn't much different to previous weeks. It was another loss to end a season full of them. But, for much of that game, I really thought we were going to finish the year for a 3rd win. The fans certainly were getting excited. And the roar when Zach put us back in front was one of the loudest of the year. And unfortunately, we couldn't hold on. And the unfortunate thing is, it's really a match where when you look at the data, it's one that we really should have won. So both teams were of similar age and experience. Port were missing their best 3 midfielders and their best defender. We won most of the key metrics, so contested possession, intercept, tackles. If you believe X-Score, we generated 20 points of better shots on the day than Port did. We just really couldn't quite nail our opportunities, particularly early on where we were getting really stuck in that pocket and taking a lot of difficult shots from that pocket in the first quarter. After the first quarter, we managed to generate better shots. We couldn't take advantage of that extra possession. the power kicked out of their skin, and ultimately that got them over the line.
Yeah, there was a lot to like for much of the match. We were +7 in ground balls for the game, +8 for forward 50 ground balls. We had 20 forward 50 ground balls for the match. We averaged 12.5 across the whole season, ranked 17th. Carlton were ranked number 1 in the comp with 17.9. So 20 is, most certainly an elite level. We kept Port to just 75 marks for the match. They averaged 96 for the season. We had 26 forward half turnovers. Geelong were number 1 in the comp at 25.6. We had 75 tackles against a season average of 53.7. Adelaide are ranked number 1 in the comp with 67.5, so we went better than that. We had 19 forward 50 tackles against a season average of 9.7. Collingwood are ranked number 1 in the comp with 13 this year. So, a whole bunch of sort of pressure defensive metrics there where, been a big, big challenge for our football club for a long time. I know we played an opposition that had a lot of players out. We had some players out too, and, two very young teams. But in terms of setting a bit of a blueprint for how we'd like to defend or at least our defensive intent going forward, I thought we got a lot of the fundamentals right. But, the old adage of bad kicking's bad football, I guess. They made more than the most of their chances and we didn't, and fundamentally that was a difference in the game.
Yeah. It really was a back and forward game in terms of the way in which the momentum swung, and it was actually really fun to watch at the ground, and you were getting excited with the way Essendon was playing, and Port were responding really well there. But I guess one thing that really impressed me was our ability to pull the game back when it looked like it was getting away from us. So the Power got out to a 22-point lead, partway through the second quarter, and that lead was built on the back of, again, another patch where we were really struggling in our contested work. So minutes before they kicked their third goal in that sequence that took them out to the 22-point lead, they had about 10 more contested possessions to us. And we've talked all this year that if we're not winning contested possession, we're really not in the game. And that's when Port were able to get on top and generate multiple scores. We're able to pull that back by controlling tempo, and the way we managed the third quarter was really impressive. So we were able to win it at the coalface and then really almost play keepings off. We took 38 marks to 19, and then we were able to generate scores from that as well. So again, we played at a couple of different tempos in this game. The game sort of went a bit haywire in the last quarter, almost like last day of school vibes, and everyone was just sort of going hell for leather. But for a good period of time in that game, we were actually in control. And again, just touching on earlier, it was really disappointing to lose that given all the effort that we'd put in.
Yeah, I thought for the first part of the game, we couldn't maintain momentum. Port seemed to be able to get really quick replies, not so much from centre bounce, but within a minute or two of us scoring a goal, they were able to get one back for sort of the first quarter and a half. And what that meant was that even though we had a fair bit of field territory, we weren't capitalising on that in terms of scoreboard. And then they had that run it was the middle part of the second quarter, wasn't it, where they kicked 3 goals to 1 to 0. Our contested work fell away for that period. Again, as you touched on, familiar theme. They got some control around the outside, and that was really the only part of the game where they did control the outside. Yeah, so I guess probably the difference in this game was that it was 3 goals won rather than the game before against the Swans. It was 6 goals, and Hawks kicked 6 or 7 against us. So I guess it's just the difference in those moments where we fall asleep against the really good teams really make you pay, and thankfully for us, Port weren't up to that standard. And then I think the other thing that kind of went our way was we got that, wrestled some of that, not necessarily momentum, but we were able to stabilise again. You sort of touched on that by controlling the tempo. We kicked 1 goal to none in sort of last 5 or 6 minutes, but it was enough to at least just go in at half time with the momentum back our way rather than it being with Port Adelaide.
Yeah. The star of the day for Essendon was clearly Caddy, and we know he's had a really good year in a team that has struggled, and to kick a bag of 6 in the manner in which he did really just sort of punctuated the excitement that we all feel about him as an integral part of this side going forward. And, part of his ability to kick 6 this week might have to do with his opposition not being as strong. Obviously, Aliir, who would have been a likely matchup for him, was knocked out the previous week, so he had a lesser opponent than he otherwise might have. But it was also really noticeable that he was getting the ball in much better positions this week to have easier shots on goal than he has done for most of the year. Also, I think his kicking action looked better. I'm not a biomechanist. I certainly aren't an expert in kicking actions, but just from the sense of the way in which he's lining up and the way in which he's going about his kicking, it does feel like there's a bit more of a set routine to it, and it does seem to be working. It's probably, there's a bit to say about the work that he's been doing with Matthew Lloyd. I do, after that game, I sort of went back and I remember Mitch Cleary tweeting just over a month ago that Caddy had been working with Matthew Lloyd about the way in which he's kicking the ball and his leading patterns and things along those lines. So up to the point of the year where Mitch tweeted that Nate was working with Lloyd, he kicked 30 goals and 30 behinds for the season. For the rest of the year post that, he kicked 16 goals and 6 behind. So, a lot of us have felt that Caddy's goal kicking and his finishing was one thing that was holding him back. So if he can get that right, he's going to be a top 5 key forward in the comp in the near future.
Yeah, he certainly is. I mean, if you add missed shots into that, it's not quite as impressive. He did miss some shots in the final few weeks and not score at all. But yeah, let's not take anything away from him. To me, it looked like he had this habit of sort of getting his kicking hand too far in front of himself. It's actually something that troubles Peter Wright when his confidence is down. And what that means is that his foot is then having to chase the ball and he loses sort of momentum through his kicking. And he seems to have got that ball drop a lot closer to his body now. And that's really helping him straighten up and kick through the ball a lot better and at least find some improved consistency. I also think the last couple of weeks it really helped to have Peter Wright not have to go into the ruck. So Nate didn't have to contend with having, necessarily the best defender all the time or the tallest or the biggest or getting double teamed as often as he was. Think about that period where once Archer May went out of the side, Nate was often having to take 2 or 3 tall defenders at one time and didn't get too many easy looks. Nothing for any Essendon player this year was easy, but at least with that sort of better structure ahead of the footy that Peter Wright helps give you, Nate was able to get on the end of some easier opportunities. Went and crunched some data this week. Over the last 25 years, only 6 times has the leading goal kicker in the bottom team had more scoring shots than Nate has this year. And in that, we're talking about guys like Matthew Richardson, Brendan Favola, Nathan Brown, all in their prime. So some really, really good forwards of the competition. A 20-year-old Jeremy Cameron at the GWS Giants was the only one that had more shots in a wooden spoon year under the age of 24. So what he's done played most of this season as a 20-year-old. If you just go back over Essendon's own goal kicking records, since Matthew Lloyd kicked 62 goals in 2008, you've got Joe Danaher kicked 62 in 2017. You've got Peter Wright kicked 53 in 2022. Kyle Langford kicked 51 in 2023. They're the only ones to have kicked more goals than what Nate kicked this year with his 46. So he's had a remarkable season in a side that really struggled to get 450 entries and doing it as a 20-year-old copying, the best or second best key defender each week. It's, a lot to be excited about.
Yeah. The final term was certainly crazy the way Port were able to score from the centre bounce. So up until the final quarter, that only scored 1 point from this source. In the final term, they kicked 5 goals, 1. And, the best team in the AFL at scoring from centre bounce is Brisbane. They only average 18 points for an entire game this year. So it really was a massive outlier. And ultimately, it's probably that part of the ground that costs us a win. I know at the time, or in your first thoughts, you spoke about Peter Wright going off with a knee, and we still haven't had an update on him, so hopefully it's nothing serious or long-term with Peter, but that sort of shifted. We used Vigo as a forward in that case, and they put Brian in the ruck, and I think probably wasn't as competitive against Sweet as Vigo had been, and that would have played a part in our centre bounce work falling down. Was there anything else that you saw in that final quarter that meant the Power were able to get out and score so easily?
Yeah, I think over the last 2 weeks where 2 or 3 games where Vigo and Nick have played together, it might have been 3. Vigo's been the most impressive of the 2 ruckmen. I think Nick started to labour a little bit as the year went on. I think we need to recognise that he came off an ACL injury, so he didn't have a pre-season, late start to the year. So, we shouldn't write off the talent that he has. But I think just in terms of pure impact, Vigo was the more impactful ruckman for us over the last couple of weeks, particularly post-hit out. I think Vigo showed a lot more there. And then I think more generally, we just got the mix wrong. If you look at the last couple of centre bounces, Sharp, Setterfield, Caldwell and McGrath were the 4 that we used from memory. There's not really a lot of acceleration there, and I thought we were really flat-footed. We looked like we were probably just set up to hope that we could keep the ball in close and just lock it down for a little while and get repeat bounces, where I think we would have been a lot more better served looking to get some territory and lock it in our forward half. The other thing too, not being critical of the young man, but Dyson Sharp, for their second last goal, Dyson Sharp allowed Burgoyne to get goal side of him. And once that happened, he was never going to be able to win that foot race once he did. So I think probably a mistake not getting Zach in there. We know what Zach's like in terms of multiple efforts and defensive pressure, and he has some acceleration. He probably would have been a better matchup for someone like Burgoyne. But, as much as we all would have loved the win, or most of us would have loved the win, I think there's some out there that were happy with the loss. I guess in the grand scheme of things, it's another great coaching and teaching moment to Dyson that he'll take a lot from and help him become a better player going forward.
Yeah. The game also saw a lot of positives in terms of the way some players performed that should give them a lot of confidence heading into 2027, and particularly those who've had injury-interrupted years. I think the way Angus Clark has played, particularly the past couple of weeks, showed just what been missing for much of the year. And last week, this game against the Power, his ability to get forward and impact on the scoreboard was great. This next player, it took him a bit of time to get back to his best after his injuries, but seeing Kako's performance was also really encouraging. And what I really liked this week was that he actually finally pulled the trigger on a shot for goal. It's been one of the things I've been a little bit critical of Isaac, particularly since he's come back from his latest injury. And I do think it's part of his makeup that he's probably a pass first player rather than a shoot first player. If you get my drift, I think he looks to try and bring others into the game before taking the opportunities himself. I think he's probably got to find a better balance where he takes on the shot when he has the opportunity. But he did that this week with a really great goal. And then Jai Caldwell has been really down on his performance all year, probably played his best game for the season. And even when Jai was in the side at the beginning of the year, he did seem to be hampered by something. So again, it was really pleasing to see him almost back to his best. So if all three of those players can have big years next season, it is going to help us improve our performance from what we put out this year.
Yeah, I thought Archie Perkins stepped up in the second half too in some really critical moments, and I liked that we used him deeper. I've spoken about this before. I think his best work as a forward is when he's deep. He's good above his head. He knows how to lead. He works well in and around other forwards. He's a challenging matchup, and he's more often than not a pretty good finisher. I thought his contribution there sort of put his hand up to get himself another contract. I still think there's a world where he can go into the midfield and give us something in there from time to time. But yeah, I like that. But for the other three, well, Archie included, if he's remains on the list and gets another contract, I think it's a really big pre-season for them. We know the qualities that Angus Clark has around his fitness. So for him, it's just getting continuity back. He certainly looked rusty on his return to senior footy, and that's understandable. Young guy, hasn't played a lot of footy in 2026. But that last quarter really showed his smarts and his craft, and that we've got a player there that is going to help take us forward. I think there's probably a decision to be made on where he plays. Is it half forward like we've seen the last few weeks? Is it on a wing where we've seen him play that sort of real attacking Dempsey-style wing role? Or is it half-back where we know he's got some intercept attributes and he's a pretty good user of the footy? Or is he just going to be one of those players that plays a variety of roles, and perhaps his best ability is his flexibility? Kako really did remind us in that game just what the player he can be for us. You're right about that. At times he reminds me of Leroy Jetta. I think Leroy Jetta was someone who never really felt comfortable at the level despite his skill set, and therefore didn't really exploit it in the way that he could have. And at times this year, Isaac's reminded me a little bit of that. But it's nice to see him training with the VFL side this week. I think he's a tremendous young man and tremendous club person. I think this preseason could be the real making of him under Mark McVeigh. If he can have a bit of a transformational off-season, get himself really, really, really fit. I think one thing about this young group is that they're all going to get together and push themselves. And if he can really buy into that, that's not a suggestion he hasn't been, by the way. I don't want anyone to take that I'm suggesting something, but I think he could really go to a whole new level in 2027. And if you look at his fellow Isaac Rankin, he did something similar. He had kicked 16 goals in 18 games in his second year, and then really popped in his third year, which was his final year at the Suns, and ultimately went across to the Crows and went better again. But that last year at the Suns, he kicked 29 goals in 18 games, playing in a similar role, half forward, forward pocket, through the midfield a little bit. So yeah, I think for Isaac, it's really just about getting that trust in his body back. Those stress fractures in the back can be really tricky injuries. And then for Jai, he only had 64% of time on ground. Only Nick Bryan for us had less game time. He clearly hasn't been fully fit at any stage this season. He did look to be a bit freer against Port. Maybe that was because he was just fresher, not having to to carry the workload like he had at previous parts of the season. Kind of feel like next year might be a bit make or break for him in terms of whether he can really hit his full potential as a footballer or whether he's going, if you think about the fact that we've got Sharp and Roby coming through, Farrow's going to end up in that midfield mix at some point. That, Kako likely to see more midfield time if he can get himself really fit. Nick Martin coming back into that fold as well. So, is Jai going to be happy being the fourth or fifth mid in the rotation, or is he going to use this preseason to really show his wares and put his hand up and look to be, a real leader of that midfield and of this footy club going forward?
Indeed. And speaking of people who have led this football club for many years, or sort of trying to segue there, if that was Zach Merritt's last game and his last act was that goal to send us ahead in the final quarter, I think it is going to be a positive memory for him to go out on, even if we ultimately didn't win the game. Being at the ground, to hear the noise of the crowd when people realised the significance of what was happening when he got that free kick and he started walking back and people thinking about the moment in the game and then to see both his passion and his teammates getting around him when he slotted that goal was really fantastic to see. And again, obviously we couldn't finish the job, but, I've been more critical of most of the way Zach handled last year, but the way he's conducted himself this season certainly has repaired a lot of the damage that was done with the fan base at the end of last year. And look, if he does leave after this season, it certainly won't be with as much animosity as it would have been if it went through last year.
Yeah, he had a couple of poor games this year and people, including the media and even myself, at times got stuck into him pretty unfairly. I think he's allowed to have down games. And I guess that was always likely to be the case going into this year with what happened at the end of last season. But for him to go back and really take ownership of that goal, the news came out afterwards that he played the game with, was it a fractured eye socket and a bulging disc in his back. So he must have been awfully uncomfortable physically. To go back and kick that, the crowd really got behind him. It was kind of up there for different reasons with Anthony McDonald tip and Woody goal on his return against Hawthorn a few years ago, just in terms of the crowd all uniting and getting behind a player. If that is for Zach in the red and black, and until it's finalised, I'm going to continue to hold out a level. I hope that it won't be. He's been such a champ for us. But yeah, if that's his last moment, then pretty classy way to go out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, before we get to the main news of the week with the appointment of Mark McVeigh, I think it's important to recognise and reflect on the contribution of Dean Solomon over the past few months after stepping in as head coach. It's certainly been a very tough gig with where the team has been on the ladder, how they've been performing, the lack of resources he's had at his disposal in terms of support staff with a couple of players or a couple of coaches leaving when Brad was sacked. I guess the thing I've appreciated most of Dean's time as interim head coach is he's never let the players or the club coast to the finish line and has really strived to get something out of his tenure in charge. I mean, the expectations on players was really clear, and that was really exemplified with the message that he sent to Hussein Al-Ashkar and how he responded to that. Hussein had been kicking multiple goals in a couple of weeks up to being dropped, but there was a clear issues with his game that the Dean identified. That was obviously really clearly explained to Hussein. He went back to VFL level. He worked on it. He showed that he listened and followed through on that feedback, and then he brought that same game to the AFL and was a big reason why we ended up winning that Giants game. So I think it's the sort of message you really want to be seeing to players. And we saw the response that, Hussein at the very least really respected the feedback that he got and built on it. We've talked in the last couple of weeks, there's been clear signs of improvement in certain areas, such as tackle numbers, which improved substantially over the past few games. The way in which we've defended the ground. We spoke last week against the Swans, against a really good ball movement side, how good we were at slowing down and stopping their ball movement. I think what he's done is he's given the new coach a really good springboard to launch from 2027. I know sounds silly to say when we only won one game in his tenure, but I definitely think that there's a lot to take out of these past few weeks. I know his future's up in the air. There's obviously the opportunity for him to stay as an assistant coach, but given the way he's spoken about his family and his commitments back home, I wouldn't be surprised if he does head back home. So if that's the case, a big thank you to Dean for everything you've done this past year.
Yeah, well said, mate. I made this comment in Patreon chat during the week that it's pretty easy to sit on the sidelines unhappy about the situation our football club finds itself in and agitate and throw mud and try and push board members out and hide in the shadows as Andrew Welsh referred to it to, pretending that you know better. it's a lot harder to know that you don't have all the answers and roll up your sleeves and get in there and help regardless. It's a pretty thankless task, I think, being an interim coach, and I think what he's done has been incredible. He's one of the great people of the Essendon Football Club and one of the great club people. They award a club person award each year, and it normally I think they award one to a player, and then there's also one that normally goes to a staff member. It'd be pretty unconventional for a coach to win it, but I think he would be a worthy recipient of that. It's really, really hard to embed a game plan in a pre-season, let alone in the middle of a season but we've seen a definite shift in our defensive intent and pressure. In the last 5 weeks of the season, we moved up to 14th for defensive 50 to forward 50 transition against and scores against on turnover. Now, 14th isn't what we want to be, but this was a team that was 18th and a very, very, very young team. So, that's a real positive move given, our age profile and where we've been. Number 2 for tackles, number 3 for forward 50 tackles. It's a much better baseline to move forward into 2027. On top of that, I know there's been a lot of work behind the scenes, things that haven't been reported, haven't been talked about, that haven't been published, but early morning sessions with young players, extra fitness work, extra craft work, and he's been doing that all whilst being away from his family, which must be incredibly difficult. I mean, I go away for a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks at a time for work, and I miss home every single time to be away from your home and in his case, his wife and his children. I think that must be a really tough ask. So what an outstanding club person. It was great to see so many people get around him on Tuesday and thank him as well for what he's done, both publicly through the press conference, but also in person. I selfishly, I hope that he's back at the footy club next year. But on a personal level, I'd also understand if he isn't, given his family situation.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, it was over 3 months of waiting to find out who would be Essendon's coach in 2027. We had hints of who was going to be on Sunday night after a whole radio silence for much of that 3 months, but we finally had it confirmed on Monday when Mark McVeigh was announced as Essendon's new head coach for the next 3 seasons. There's certainly been a fair bit of criticism in the media about the way in which the process was conducted. A lot of shots taken by people who are outside of the process. I guess, to me, that just sounded like some disgruntled journalists upset that no one was leaking to them. I guess, before we really touch on Mark, how did you see the process play out?
I think the club's done a really, really good job. I think that the truth of it is that there was the silence from Essendon created a vacuum that was filled by AFL media. And, I don't think the club was naive to knowing that was going to come, but they made a decision at the very start of the process that they weren't going to respond to stories and innuendo, and that they were going to just batten down and do a really thorough job of this process. And, really it wasn't until the Swans leaked the news that Mark was coming down to Melbourne on Monday to meet with the board that anything got out about the process that the club didn't want to be known. So I think that's a great job. The panel should be commended because that's not always been the way our club has operated. And to be honest, it's really only been since Dave Barham took over as president and now continues under Andrew Welsh, where we have had that really tight, unified and closed board that leaks aren't happening anymore. So I think from that perspective, it was a really, really well-ran process and ultimately a good outcome.
Yeah. Well, this actually leads really nicely into the final Barrett Award nominee for the year before the winner is announced on Jack Kirby night in a couple of weeks. And this one is related to the coaching process, with Dermot Brereton calling the whole outcome, quote, ego-driven on Welsh's part to pick McVeigh over James Hird, end quote, which he said on an ESPN show that he hosts with James Hird. Well, look, if anyone knows about ego, it is Derm. It's succinctly put by Jeremy in our Patreon chat. One of the great love stories of the last 50 years, Dermot Brereton and himself. I guess the proof will be in the pudding as to how Mark goes, but Derm reflects a few people in the Essendon fandom and the media who can't really look objectively at things when it comes to James. And I think just in regards to James and his participation in the process, there's a lot of people saying if he wasn't going to get the job, why would you let him go through the process? I think that opens up a whole other can of worms in terms of creating other pressure on the process. I think from what we can understand, James presented well at the initial interview, and that was enough to get him to the final interview. He was obviously well prepared. He was really keen for the job from everything we can sort of understand and gather from from other sources, it sounds like he presented really well. It's just that Mark presented better and was a better fit at this time for the Essendon Football Club. So I think overall, again, allowing James to take part, put his best foot forward and ultimately not be successful, I think was probably the right call in the end. I feel like that if he had not been allowed to participate at all, that would have created far more issues than the way in which it ended up being.
I think you've nailed it, mate. I think he was invited to be part of the process, which and he should have been, given his standing at the football club and his standing in the industry. So that makes perfect sense. And then, as I understand it, as you said, he presented incredibly well, which would be no surprise to anyone. I think that knows or has observed James that he would do that. So it stands to reason to me that he was involved in the process from start to finish, because he's of a high enough quality to be able to stand alongside the other three candidates who made it through to the end. On Dermot's comments specifically, I first met Andrew Welsh as a teenager when he was drafted to Essendon. There's not a hint of ego with Andrew Welsh. He's the same person with the same values now as he was then. Being an AFL footballer didn't change him. Being successful in business hasn't changed him. Being the president of the Essendon Football Club hasn't changed him. There's not a single skerrick of ego about Andrew Welsh, and none of what he's doing as the president of our football club is about him. It is all about returning our football club to where, as fans, we all want it to be, and that's being a sustainable, successful football club that's competing and winning finals on a regular basis, and that's his one and only motivation. It's got nothing to do with him being the one that gets to pat himself on the back and say, I did this. I think Derm has let his integrity as a media operative get in the way of his own ego and his own relationships here, which I guess is pretty ironic given the comments that he made.
Yeah. As I mentioned at the start there, this will be our final Barrett Award nomination before the winner of the inaugural award is announced on Jack Kirby night in a couple of weeks, and the voting is out on that. You, me, and our secret silent partner in the Damien Barrett Award have gathered our preferred nominations for this year, and we'll put it to the vote of the patrons. So it'll be great to see the results there on Jack Kirby night. Connected to the Barrett Award, amazingly, just this week, there was a post on the AFL Reddit with data compiled by Wooden Spoon Data and Gazman, which they've been doing throughout the year, where they're gathering all the claims made by the main AFL journalists and tracking how accurate they were, so things that came true and things that didn't. Dan McVeigh has the highest percentage of correct claims. Tom Morris has the highest raw total of correct claims. The person with the most inaccurate claims for the year, guess who? Damien Barrett. Seeing that data, it gave me real confidence that we've named this award after the correct person, and it's not just from blind hatred.
I think both things can be true, mate. I think it can be, justice and the right call, and a little bit of hatred thrown in there as well. So they're not mutually exclusive. But yeah, I'm glad
to have a statistical base given the show that we do for my hatred.
That certainly helps, doesn't it? That certainly helps. But yeah, look, let's focus on the big news of the week, mate, and the announcement of Mark McVeigh as senior coach of the Essendon Footy Club for, was it 3-year deal, I think?
Yeah, that's right. And look, if I'm honest, when the four names were announced as being the final four candidates, Mark wasn't the one that immediately grabbed me. I was interested in Jamie Graham's story. I was really interested in Murray Davis as that sort of alternate pathway a la Chris Fagan. And obviously James Hird sort of eclipses most other people when it comes to Essendon and Essendon-related topics. But I guess, having listened to him speak both in all his interviews, and I'm not sure if he's still doing an interview now. I imagine he's probably imagining he's doing an interview now. He's done so many. But also in person, what he's talked about is his area's focus, his clear desire to see the team improve. I'm more than pleased with who ended up as head coach. Are you happy with the outcome there, Jono?
Yeah, I was. I was in a pretty nice position that I felt that we had four really strong candidates and that the process was legitimate. It was going to be comprehensive. It was multifaceted. I thought we had three guys with incredible coaching CVs over a long period of time at really successful programs. And then we had James Hird, who I've seen firsthand what a truly great football mind he is and what he's capable of. So I was going to be pretty happy regardless of the outcome, and I was comfortable that the process was going to deliver us, the very best outcome. And yeah, I think I'm not surprised that Mark has already started to win people over with how he's communicating, because I've experienced that in the past. But even knowing him a little bit from his playing days up close, I'm certainly pleasantly surprised with just how quickly he's hit the ground running, how strongly he's speaking, how brutally honest he's being. And yeah, I think that this young group's going to really, really gravitate towards him.
Yeah, you get that sense just from listening to him. He's someone that you sit up and listen to when he speaks. You mentioned there that you spent a lot of time with Mark as he when he was a player and you were working at the club. What are the strengths that you've seen from him during that time where you personally interacted with him?
Yeah, we're seeing them already come to the fore, aren't we? But I saw someone who had a deep passion and love for this football club. And that's not enough to be a senior coach, right? Otherwise, you and I might as well put our hands up and see how we go, because we both have that too. But I saw someone who worked incredibly hard and harder than pretty much anyone else. He knew how to have a good time and really did know how to have a good time, but that was never at the sacrifice of putting in the work. He squeezed every ounce out of himself as a footballer. He was a standard setter. He dragged others with him. He didn't tolerate sloppiness in standards either of others and called people out and held them accountable. I think as he matured, he got better at delivering that message to others. He was a really strong and passionate communicator. And the one thing that always struck me with Spike, there was a real hole in our list, Jimmy. You might remember we've spoken about this, and every Essendon fan would know it. At the end of 2022, we had to trade away guys
2002.
2002. Carousella, Heffernan, Blomfield, Moorcroft was gone, Hardwick was gone, among a couple of others. So we had this hole in our list in that sort of middle age bracket. So we had the young guys, which Mark was part of. He was still only sort of 21, 22 when that was happening. And then we had Hurd, Lloyd, Fletcher, those sort of guys who'd been around a long time, Jason Johnson, etc. So Mark was kind of the player that bridged those gaps. He was as comfortable being around the young guys as he was around the senior guys, and able to communicate to both groups. And it's not that necessarily that there was a divide. I think it's just that there was a bit of a changing in eras there, and he was kind of stuck, or not stuck, but one that was able to pull the two groups together quite well.
Yeah. Just building on more on Mark's history, particularly post playing, and and again since he's been appointed, I really reflected on his history and coaching, and that sort of drove my questions when we did sit down to talk to him. I think his CV really does fit where the club's listed now. So his work as a development coach at the Giants, the Swans, particularly with the Allies, which was really impressive given the history of the Allies in the under-18 championships, really marries up well to what is going to be one of the youngest lists in the competition, and that one that is going to be bringing in more top-end draft picks this year. It's got a couple of high-end academy players and father-sons next year, so there's going to be a lot more youth coming into this side, which is going to need development, and that's part of his background. The other major part of his background is his work as a defensive line coach at the Swans. Again, really matches up with what we've been lacking for many years in having a consistent defensive approach. So, the more I've reflected on it, the more I've heard him speak, the more I think he's the right person for the right time at this club.
Yeah, he's been part of a Giants group that embedded an attacking game plan, the Orange Tsunami, as it's been referred to. That was quite unique and in a lot of ways really shifted modern ball movement in the modern game, and teams also that have been really strong in the contested part of the game as well at both the Giants and at the Swans. So I think across all phases of the game, he's been in environments, even though he might not have taught those lines or coached those lines, he's been in environments where they've taught and developed it incredibly well. And I guess that's where that skill set as a development coach comes in. His roles weren't responsible for developing, one set of skills in a game. It was about preparing young players to be able to step into the AFL environment and be able to contribute from the get-go across all phases of football. And if you look at some of the young players that both the Giants and the Swans have been able to bring up to speed quickly, Spike has his fingerprints on a lot of that.
Yeah. I guess the only concerns I have with him as a coach is not to do with the immediate future. It's probably to do with where we're at, hopefully in 2 to 3 years' time, where we are through the big development phase and really looking to start the push up the ladder and compete with finals. And he's obviously been in successful programs and knows what it takes, but it's probably the big question mark at the moment for me is how is he going to handle that, that push phase and that finals phase. That said, though, you'd probably say the same thing about most rookie senior coaches have those same question marks. So that's not anything unique to Mark. He certainly had a great apprenticeship. He's got great mentors and looks like he's going to get complete support from the whole club. I do have a lot of faith in Mark hearing him speak. He's going to leave no stone unturned to improve both the club and himself to give the Bombers the best chance of success.
Yeah, I mean, the harsh reality of this is that there's very few people that have stepped into a role like this one at a massive club that's been down the bottom, hasn't had success in a long, long time, and been able to see it through from start to finish. So if we're looking for someone that has been there and done that, I'm not sure that person exists. So whoever we appointed was going to have some question marks over their ability. I've heard him say a couple of times in the last 48 hours that he doesn't know everything and that he doesn't have all the answers. That's really refreshing because I think that's a really good starting point. That allows him and the club to go and get the right people around him that make sure he has the support he needs to set himself and our club up for success. I think if where young coaches I've seen go wrong in the past, or first-time coaches at Essendon and at other clubs, is not surrounding themselves, maybe being a little bit threatened that in doing so, and not surrounding themselves with experienced people. And I don't think Spike will make that mistake.
Yeah, you're right. It can't just be about Mark. It needs to be the team around him that can support his vision and help cover the areas that aren't Mark's current strengths. And I'm sure the club is working on getting that support around him. But I guess in your mind, what are the key roles we need to get in place to support his vision?
Yeah, I think it's not. I'm not sure if it's just about roles. I think it's also about experiences and qualities. It appears that Craig Vozzo, if you read between the lines of the question from Kaltumi that Tim Roberts answered at the press conference, is likely to come back in a senior role in the football department. I think that's a good start. He's an incredibly astute football person who's helped deliver tremendous success to West Coast. I've only had a few conversations with Craig over the last couple of years, and every time I have, I feel like I've gone away from that more enlightened about the game and how it's played and what are the skills and attributes that are needed these days. So I think if we could get him back to the footy club, it would be a huge win. It was a shame that he's had a need with family to go back to Adelaide, but hopefully that's settled down now and we can get him back. I do think that Mark could probably benefit from having some experience in the box with him, whether that's someone who's been a senior coach, not too dissimilar to the role that Simon Goodwin has played at the Swans. I suspect that Dean Cox really pounced at being a relatively junior senior coach on getting someone like Goody to the club to help him, or whether it's someone who's had extensive experiences in successful programs like Murray Davis has had. That's not suggesting it needs to be him, of course, but there's plenty of people, or a number of people out in the industry that have been around for a long, long time now and been at multiple clubs and successful clubs. So I think someone who can fill that for Mark, I think would really help. And then I think if we can add another coach or two from, assistant coaches or line coaches from successful programs. I know there's been talk already about Nick Melcheski perhaps. And then, we clearly need to continue to invest in development resources as well. I think, Rowan and McLean have done a good job this year along with Michael Hurley. But I think if we can keep adding to that portfolio, then yeah, that'd be beneficial.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, let's get to the big news of the week. There was one major event that happened that superseded all others. And look, when we first started this show 5 seasons ago now, I never thought we'd be saying that we would be part of the first in-depth interview with the head coach of Essendon after their appointment, but that's where we found ourselves shortly after Mark's press conference on Tuesday. It certainly was surreal to be able to get some time with him and really broach topics that would have been interest to both us and our listeners. I was actually listening to the press conference on the way in, and when I could work out what the questions were, because you couldn't actually hear what they were saying, you had to sort of guess what Mark and Andrew and Tim had been asked. As you said earlier, it was a lot about Sydney. It was a lot about James Hird. It was a lot about things that, for most Essendon fans, it's not really of interest. It was only 1 or 2 questions I thought that really broached what kind of coach Mark wanted to be and what his experiences were. So I thought that it was a really great opportunity to hear some more in-depth things from him. I think between us, we ended up preparing over 50 questions, and obviously we had to limit what we asked, but from the responses that this has got both on our channels and Fiona's and Scott's channels, it seems like people have been really, really pleased with what we got out of there and the info we got for Essendon fans about what Mark is going to be like as a coach. So yeah, I think not only was it a great experience to actually sit down and do it, I think it was a worthwhile experience in helping people get a bit more of a sense of what type of coach Mark is going to be.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I don't think anyone was surprised to see you sitting there with a clipboard and me scribbling notes. True to form. You and I have long debated about doing interviews with players and coaches. We've dabbled in them over the past couple of years, but I think we kind of feel it's not really our skill set, and we kind of largely steered away from it. But the club was really keen to have us as part of it, which I think is a testament to the community that Don the Stat is. I think there's a lot of negative connotations and talk about coterie groups at our football club, and we're certainly not one of those, but we have a growing community of, a couple of thousand or more people now that are really passionate about the club. So to be able to represent them, and I hope, and based on the feedback, I think we've done them some real justice to get some good insights. And I think to Spike's credit, he gave really good answers. He was open and honest and gave a lot of detail and spoke, at a level that people would have understood as well, which I think is a real skill in itself. And I really enjoyed listening to him speak. So it was a great opportunity to be part of, and really grateful we got that opportunity and we took it up and we could make it there with our work commitments as well. And I think overall, mate, the club's done a really good job of telling the Mark McVeigh story. I think the content that they produced on a really tight turnaround has been brilliant. I think it probably all happened at 24 hours earlier because of the Sydney leak meant that it was probably all rushed together a little bit sooner than maybe they'd planned. But for our social media and content team to deliver what they have in a really tough year, they only found out who the coach was. They knew what the deadlines or the dates were, but who the coach was at the same time, the rest of us as fans and members did to pull that together. I think has been a tremendous job, and you don't have to venture too far into the comments on social media throughout this year to see what our social media team would have had to have endured this year. People forget that they're humans as well. So I think real props to them. I just want to comment on the press conference quickly. I've seen online a lot of criticism about the fact that you couldn't hear, you commented on it, you couldn't hear the journos' questions. That's largely because they all have their own microphone. That's so one on themselves and one on the desk. All they're interested in is capturing their own question and their own answer to broadcast through their own broadcast channels. They're not interested in collecting the whole. There was a boom microphone there, but because the questions were going back and forth and around the room, it was really hard for the boom operator to be able to stay out of the way of the cameras and be able to capture that audio. So not a great experience, I know, but really hard to do much about. The other bit of criticism I've seen is on some of the body language for the players in a couple of still photos, them not looking that excited or not having smiles on their face or not paying attention. I looked across a couple of times. There was ongoing themes of questions, which was to be expected about James Hird, and then also what was happening at the Swans. And there was a lot of sort of murmurs and eye rolling as that continued. I think the players wanted to hear from Spike about his plans for Essendon, our footy club, and we're up and about that. The questions around Hirdy and the questions around what's happened at the Swans recently got pretty tedious for everyone that was in the room. But also sort of back on the content, but also the day itself. It was really great to see Spike's family be part of it. He's spoken a lot about his family, and I think that, and not just his own family, actually made a lot of comments in our interview about getting to know players and their families as well, and what makes them tick. I think that really speaks to the values of Mark McVeigh, but also, Ken Fraser was there to greet him on his first day, which was brilliant to see. Mark Harvey, Dustin Fletcher, Colin Hooper, one of the all-time great staff members of the football club were there, among others. So it really did feel like the very, very best of the Essendon Football Club on Tuesday, all coming together to get around and support their new coach. And there haven't been a lot of moments throughout this year where I felt particularly proud of things, but I certainly did on Tuesday.
Yeah, you mentioned Ken Fraser there, and it was great to see him there at the start and handing Spike the jumper as he walked in. What nearly was the Barrett Award nomination for this week was the Herald Sun story covering that, where they managed to name him 3 different ways as Ken Fraser, Ken Fletcher, and Ken Jackson. So well done there. But look, I think a real well done. both to Fiona from Bomber Banter and Scott from the Lunchtime Catch-Up podcast for their questions as well. And I thought we all worked really well together on this. We've all got our own platforms. We've all got our own areas of expertise. And I thought we came together as a collective, as people who don't, work together all that often to conduct something that I thought was handled really well. So, big thanks to them for, for sharing that time with us. And you've mentioned it before, but big thanks to the club for facilitating this as well, especially all the people in the room who did help put it together. It was very well done and very well staged and very well handled. So yeah, just big thanks to all people involved.
Yeah, no, well said, mate.
Yeah. Well, look, this episode does sort of get into our immediate postseason thoughts. We are going to do a full deep dive into the 2026 season, although given how it played out, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of positives in that episode. But we will, as always, and in Don the Stat style, go through everything because it's not as bad as it seems. It's not as good as it seems. Certainly was not a fun season, at least from an on-field perspective overall. But as always, there were things to be excited about and a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, there were certainly parts of it that were a real chore to get through this year. Let's not shy away from that. But we prioritised getting games into young players from the very outset, and that was always going to lead to challenges in terms of win-loss. We came off a season in 2025 where we had 15 debutants, which was unprecedented. We then had another 6 in 2026. Jackson Artemis, we picked up in the mid-season draft, played the last 6 games. Hussein Al-Ashka played 9 games. Kondo Giardis played 12. Roby and Sharp played 15. Farrow played 21. Sharp, Roby, Farrow all got Rising Star nominations along the way. On top of that, Caddy finished the season on 49 games. Roberts on 48. Kako 38. Dave Wicks had a 21. I don't think many people saw that coming. To the 5 games that he played last year, Angus Clark's now up to 20. Would have been more if not for injury. So we're starting to get some real playing time into this young core. So again, get through next year and hopefully have a more competitive side. But we can go into 2028 with, Caddy and Roberts as having played 70 games, Kako having played, close to 50, Day Wicks around the 4, and Clark around the 40 mark. And then the 5 draftees from this year will be, up to 30 and 40 games each as well. So yeah, it feels like we're a long way away and there's a lot of work to do. But, another year of getting games into these young players, we have a very, very different profile in terms of experience when we hit the 2028 season.
Yeah. I guess the big story from this year as an Essendon fan was the sacking of Brad Scott. And, our first year ended up being Brent Runn's last year. And much like that sacking 4 years ago, I wasn't a big fan of the timing, mainly because, to me, it reeked of Essendon once again being impatient with trying to build something and correcting course again. Sort of reflecting on it now, 3 months past, I think the role and expectation of what the senior coach at Essendon need to do when Brad was brought in clearly changed in the last year and probably moved away from what Brad's strengths were. So I think when he was brought in, we had a group of players we thought could be performing better than they could have, but also a clear need to bring in new talent and not make the same mistakes of trading away draft capital we've done in years before. And Brad's history at North Melbourne, I think, really fit that first category where he was able to get, a lot of strong performances out of a team that had a pretty average list. So I think the expectation he could have done more with what Essendon had at the time was a valid one. And then, to his credit and to the club's credit, they also didn't try and rush it by trading out draft picks and trying to bring in talent to try and shoot up the ladder. They always maintained a position in the first round of the draft. As much as it's been criticised bringing in players like McVeigh and Gresham and Goldstein when it did it, we only used salary cap space that we had to spend anyway to try to improve. I think where it shifted really was that injury crisis last year. That meant that we ended up losing so many games in a row. And unfortunately, that flowed into this year. The injuries, we couldn't quite get a great run with injury. And they were all, and particularly this year, that most of them weren't soft tissue, which has been a problem in the past. So, touch wood that's a tick for Innes and his team. But, once that set in and the losses kept piling up, I think it really did shift the club's understanding of where the list was at. We really did need to, embrace full rebuild. And Tim Roberts' email from a couple of weeks ago sort of mentioned, we're re-engaging in a rebuild. And it's the first real time that the club has openly acknowledged it without being surreptitious about it. And I think when the board came to that realization we're in a full rebuild, they realized that didn't align with what Brad's strengths as a coach were. And rather than, sort of doing what happened with Carlton and Voss over the past 12 months, when they felt it was clear that Brad wasn't the person to take them forward, they decided to make the decision. And, Fraser's got a lot of credit for getting Carlton to a wildcard final this year. But if Carlton being brave enough to make the call at the end of last year, with the performances they've put out, they might be, having a week off now and playing off, playing the winner of wildcard final or even in a qualifying final if they've been brave enough. So I think in the end, as someone who felt we'd moved a bit early, in hindsight, it probably is the right call given who Brad is and his strengths as a coach and where the current list is at.
Yeah, I think you've summed that up pretty well. I too felt the timing was a little bit unnecessary, even just waiting a few weeks to the mid-season break. But I also respect the fact that once it was decided that Brad wasn't the man to take us forward, that pulling off the Band-Aid was probably the best way to go. And in hindsight, really would be the judge. But the level of pressure and defensive intent we sustained over the last sort of 5 to 6 to 7 weeks of the season under Dean Solomon wasn't something that we did see under Brad. It was there for a quarter or a game, but not ever week to week. So I think to gain the benefit of going into the next preseason with that sort of improved defensive intent and building our game around forward half defence and pressure, I think is a much better baseline than what we had at the end of last year, where we were building off the back of, kind of patching a team together with 4 mid-season draft picks. So yeah, I do think that decision, the timing of it, could end up being a bit of a turning point. We all look back and acknowledge, that the time was right and it was for the best.
Yeah, and that's also not to, ignore the good work that Brad did for this club and helping guide the restructure and obviously moved on from a lot of the staff that would been at the club up to Brad taking charge. And I think his stability and his experience allowed us to do that in a way that meant it wasn't as disruptive as it potentially could have been. And I think he should get a lot of respect for that. But, sitting here now, I'm also really content with the decision the club has made to better align the senior coach with where the list is currently at.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question we're in a better position as a football club now because Brad Scott was prepared to stare down the Wolves and be a really firm, strong presence at our footy club whilst we're making really difficult decisions to move people on, and that includes players as well. Like we would have been a better football team had we hung on to some of the players that we got rid of, some of the experience that we got rid of, no doubt. But I'm not necessarily sure we would have been a better football club, nor would we have been better positioned for success in the future. And I think that's a really tough thing to do at any club, let alone one with all the baggage that Essendon has, all the noise, the people in the shadows that Andrew Welsh referred to. That was my favourite line of the whole press conference, by the way. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, I think Brad did a lot of good work for our footy club that we're only truly going to appreciate when we get back to success in the coming years.
Yeah. I guess, again, just sort of reflecting on the season as a whole, that the injuries at the beginning of the year certainly didn't help us establish any continuity. And I think that really compounded the form from the end of last year. I think, we could have written off that bad run at the back end of 2025 if we'd managed to start well, that the players have been able to switch it off. But I think once, those first couple of games, in particular the Hawks game and then the Port game, were 2 of our worst performances of the year. And that sort of really set the tone. And what that meant was that it reinforced what had happened at the end of last year. I think if we start strong, we start in a positive fashion, even if we didn't beat the Hawks in round 1, if it was a close game and we just got pipped, I think that would have made it much easier for the players to sort of write off the end of last year. But because we started so poorly, it just infected much of the rest of the year. And I thought we sort of improved post those first couple of games right up until about Anzac Day. Obviously, we had that great win at Gather Round to break the drought, but a really good performance against the Suns. We just missed out there. But again, I think that loss on Anzac Day, particularly the way that second half played out, I think it's from that moment on that really set the wheels in motion for the coach change that we ended up having. The hammer blow really being delivered by that Dreamtime loss. And even that Dreamtime loss, we had so many injuries in that game itself, including Andy McGrath breaking his jaw. We very easily could have won that game, and that would have given Brad probably a couple more weeks. But yeah, I just think the way the season started, we never really had a chance to get into the year.
Yeah, I think I think actually a win in that game probably would have led to the same outcome anyway. But yeah, I think you're right. Although if we're going to talk injuries, it's probably worth quickly acknowledging one player that didn't get injured this year, and that's Zach Reid. He entered this season having played 19 games in 5 seasons. He finished the year having played every game, a career tally of 42. He had some tough times this year, but some brilliant moments too. He finished the season with 39 disposals and 20 marks across his last 2 games. So I think real turning point for Zach, Touchwood, a big preseason from him. He has the benefit of going into next year having completed a full season of AFL football. That must be tremendous for his confidence. I think one thing that we have as a football team where we're at going forward, or as a list going forward, is that we have some key position pillars that perhaps the other clubs around our mark don't have yet, and they're hard to find, and you need to get, truly need to get them to 50 to 60 to 70 games before they can have a really big impact. So Reid at one end, Caddy at the other. Archer May we saw for 10 games this year as well. And then Brian and Vigo Vicentini in the ruck. I think we've got some tall stocks that, we can really start to build this list around.
Yeah, indeed. And just on Zach Reid, I think, I can't speak for him. I'd love to ask him, but there was that game earlier in the year where he went off with hamstring awareness, and I think we all thought, here we go again. But the fact he was able, that ended up being nothing, and he got up to play the next week and obviously play the rest of the season. Obviously gives us a lot of confidence as fans that he might be past a lot of his injury issues. But I imagine that would have been, a real freeing moment for him as well. So often for him, he would have, come off with an injury scare or a concern, and would have gone for scans, and it would have ended up being something that kept him out for weeks at a time. To be able to not have that happen this time, I think would have been really freeing for him. And look, just moving on from that, we will dig into the positives more next week in our full season review. But I think anything positive, other than what you've talked about there with Zach, really has to do with the younger players. And you touched on it there. All 5 of our 2025 national draft picks have played 9 or more senior games. All of our first round picks in Roby, Farrer and Sharp look like we've hit the mark with those selections. There's some question marks around some of the players taken around those picks at the moment, but I haven't heard too many people questioning what we've done with the 3 players we picked in the first round to this stage. And obviously there's a long way to go in their careers. There's a lot of players that have looked really strong in their first year and haven't gone on with it, but the signs certainly are bright there with what we did in the draft last year.
Yeah, certainly are. I think if you have 5 picks in a national draft and get 2, come away with 2 that become, really good footballers, I think you've probably had a pretty good draft. If you get 3, you've had a really good one. To get 5, and a lot of water has to go under the bridge, a lot of development needs to go into these guys. They're not done deals just yet, but on initial signs, if we walk away from that draft with 5 from 5 who can play a significant role for us going forward, then yeah, boy, oh boy, it puts us in a really healthy list. And I think we should all have a lot of confidence in Matt Rosa and his team, which includes Craig Vozzo, of course, Rob Force tonight, and everyone else in that recruitment team on what they might be able to do with another really strong draft hand going into the 2026 national draft.
Yeah. Well, look, whilst the AFL season is over, for once the VFL season isn't actually ended either for the first time in 7 years. We're actually playing in the VFL finals, and we've actually got quite a strong presence there with 20 AFL listed players eligible for the VFL final this week against Williamstown at Windy Hill. So it's a great opportunity for them to play some knockout football, even if it is at VFL level. It certainly won't be easy, but the way they've played these past couple of months, where they pretty much had to win their last 5 or 6 games in a row to make finals, has been fantastic and make them a sneaky chance of going all the way. Big credit to Cam Joyce, stepped into the role at the last minute after the unfortunate passing of Dale Tapping, and has done a really good job in building a side that both the AFL and the VFL players have bought into. The VFL players themselves have really stood up and performed really well, particularly when they were carrying a lot more of the load earlier in the year. And unfortunately, with so many AFL players available, there will be a lot of worthy VFL players who miss out, unfortunately. It's going to be really exciting to get down to the game. There is only a capacity of 4 to 5 to the ground. I know this time last night, about 2,000 of those tickets had already been pre-sold. I'm sure more have been snapped up in the last day. So if you're keen to get down, you're going to need to grab a ticket early, because you're probably not going to be able to buy one at the gate. And I think having a big raucous Essendon crowd is going to be the 24th man. That's really going to help the Bombers get over the line in this one.
Yeah, I certainly don't envy Cam Joyce here. We've had a lot of really high quality VFL listed players throughout this season, and if all 20 AFL listed players end up playing, to narrow it down to just 3 VFL guys, or we might be able to sneak a 24th man in there as well. That's a really, really tough ask because, there's been some excellent contributions. And if someone like, a Cam Nyko has to miss out, or a Jared Ecclesy who's been around the group, Boston Dowling and the like, who have played some really good football for us, it's going to be really, really difficult, but also a really fortunate position to be in, I guess. We played Williamstown early in the year. We at Windy Hill were 5 goals up at half time, but then they ran over the top of us. So I think we only kicked 2 goals in the second half. The way that we've been playing in the second half of the year, we've been running out games really, really well. So we should fancy our chances. Finals haven't come around too often for any Essendon side, let alone our VFL team that have been in the finals for 7 years. So, really hope we can get a big Essendon crowd down there, get Windy Hill pumping, sort of make it feel a bit like the good old days. You and I will be there. So, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I wasn't old enough for the good old days, Jonas. This will be my first experience of Windy Hill with a really big crowd, or as big a crowd as they can hold. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to the game. Hopefully the Bombers can go over the line and get out of the way. I think it's likely they'll probably end up going down to Tasmania if they do win this game. So we might be having to make a bit of a road trip, Jono.
We might. I was actually told a week or two ago that our record crowd at Windy Hill, I haven't looked this up to validate it, and I'm going to quickly do that on the fly. Yeah, there we go. It was round 3, 1966, and it was 43,487. I had no idea how they were able to get that many people into the ground. That's extraordinary. I'm sure they broke all kinds of modern safety rules to do so. So, hopefully, I think that their capacity at the moment is at 5K. So they're hoping that they might be able to sell out at that level and get a big crowd there.
Yeah. Well, look, really excited for that on the weekend, and we'll probably talk about the result in that game in next week's show. And as we sort of said last week, just because the season's over for the AFL side does not mean it's over for Don the Stat. Next week, we're going to be doing our full-fledged season review. Following week to that will be our Patreon Q&A. There'll be some information about that in the Patreon for those that want to take part. And the week after will be the Jack Kirby Medal, where both the Don the Stat BNF Award and the Barrett Award winners will be announced. There's going to be plenty of other pods and videos coming out as well. We've going to be recording soon with Rick Edwards his August draft rankings. There'll be a yearly player review. Got a couple of other irons in the fire that I'm really excited to put together. So lots to talk about. And that's even before getting to the draft and trade period, where we know everyone loves to engage with that.
Yeah, can't get away from us that easy, mate. Still lots and lots to do, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, that will do for us. Our final match review, a new coach for the Bombers. So, lots of things to be really excited about, and can't wait to get stuck into that over the next few weeks. Big thanks to you, Jono, as always, for all the work that you've done this week. You're sort of our contact man for getting the interview with Mark. So thanks for helping to organise that. Yeah, again, another great week doing the show with you.
No, thanks to you, mate. This year's been a tough one. Yeah, between on-field results, coach sacking, it's been a massive year for both of us with work and family. I've had a lot on my plate, and you've been very supportive and very patient. So I really appreciate that, and I've loved every minute of putting this together with you and spending time too with the Don the Stat family. At any time things got a little bit tougher away from the football side of things, having that community rally around and to engage with has been really worthwhile and a lot of fun. So thanks to everyone out there who's listened and reviewed and chatted and all of those kinds of things. It's been fantastic.
As always, Jono, well said, mate. Till next time, stay safe and go Dons.